Welcome to the bubble, Charlie. Tim and Keith have gone to go get a coffee and get stuck into the conference. So there's been a lot of conversation about private equity and greater consolidation in financial advice today. Where do you see the independence of advice going, and what do you think about this private equity money coming into the profession?
I mean, it's been a huge process, hasn't it? We've been asking advisors over the last year how many approaches they've had for their business or their book of business if they're self-employed, and it's about 75% that say they've had at least 3 people seriously try to buy their book over the last year, make a serious attempt at it. So that's an enormous number. I think what it does is it for the advisors running businesses, I think it's a source of huge distraction. Because you want to focus on building something out, but you've always got this thing in your mind of kind of what's next. Is there some magic pot of money that I can't access yet that I need to get to? The bigger question for me, though, than the kind of impact on the industry is, has it actually, when you really get down to it, has it actually helped clients? There's an argument for it. There's an argument for kind of vertical integration and consolidation, which is that it drives value for money. But again, when we survey IFAs, we found about 2/3 say to us that in general they think consolidation has led to worse outcomes for the underlying clients, and they say that's because there's less individual advice being given, and that that's obviously potentially shoehorning into investment solutions run by the consolidators. That's a massive number. I mean, if 2 in 3 advisors think that this trend, which is probably the biggest trend in our industry, is not helping clients, I think we've got to sort of ask some questions of ourselves really about what we're doing.
What do you think about the potential of product providers buying up more IFAs and perhaps using that as kind of distribution? Do you think that's a trend that's going to come in from private equity?
Yeah, it's definitely a trend that is going to keep going. Often we see what happens in the UK follow what happens in the US, and this was really what was taking place 10 years ago. All the power shifting from people who make funds to people who have the underlying relationships with clients, and therefore the people who make funds buying them all out. The actual amount of private equity money coming in right now, though, has been just extraordinary. Hundreds of millions of pounds being committed. The fly in the ointment, though, for private equity is that it's very easy to get good private equity funding for your projects when interest rates are very, very low. It gets much harder when interest rates will rise. So I think you could sort of say that whilst it's been an extraordinarily fast process of consolidation over the last couple of years, you've had these multiple approaches for any kind of business, really. The question is, will that survive higher interest rates? I think it will certainly be slowed by higher interest rates. It's more expensive for private equity funders to get money themselves, so therefore they demand higher rate of returns when they invest, and not all these deals can support that. So I would say it will cyclically slow down as interest rates go up, but structurally it's a trend that's here to stay.
And what kind of confidence do you have in the future of financial advice? Where you're sat, you work with a select few IFAs as an investment manager. How confident are you that these kind of firms can continue to exist while all this money comes in?
Well, we've sort of dug our heels in really and said that we want to work with those firms that just want to be independent. And that's not to judge anyone who doesn't want to be independent, but it's okay to be independent too. They face enormous challenges. The regulatory costs on them are very significant. It's quite hard to attract the funding that they might need to do sort of small scale acquisitions or succession planning and stuff like that. And fundamentally, the biggest challenge they have, and I think this is what as an industry we need to address, is how do you get really talented people into independent advisory businesses? So we know that the big consolidators, they've got a plan, they've got big academies, they're very joined up systems to bring graduates in and hopefully also people coming back to work into advice, because it can be a great second career for people if maybe they've gone off to have children or something and they want to come back in. Great thing to do. But for independent firms, there's no national academy for independent advisors. There's no obvious way to fund it. And so what people say to us all the time is they want to stay independent, they want to do it, but how on earth can they get talent into the business and keep talent in the business? And I think we need to have a big conversation about that. And maybe that will require coordination across the industry to create an environment to bring those people in.
And do you think that'll get even harder as inflation goes up and people demand higher wages, and it'll be even harder to hire good talent into the advice profession?
The thing I've seen change is that 5 or 6 years ago, you could get hired as like an employed advisor pretty much as soon as you were qualified, but you never really got a book. It was, come and see if you can raise some money. Now, when people come into the industry as newly qualified advisors, there's books for them to get. There's so much movement around that they're able to get hold of assets quite quickly to manage. And I think that's a big shift. And of course, it means that salaries are going up. Now, that's okay. It's a good job being an IFA. It should have a good professional wage attached to it. The problem is that if you're a small firm and you take, say, one person on, it's a big bet for you. If you're a national consolidator, you can take on 25. Some of them might not work. That's okay. You play the averages. So it's that thing of how do you help independent firms attract talent? How do you help them defend their pricing point so that they can afford to bring talent in? And how do you help them structure the incentives for those advisors over the long term so they've got good reasons to stay in independent firms? Because I kind of intuitively think everyone's different. And the conversation you have with your advisor, it can be some of the most important conversations about your life. I mean, it's the conversation when you find out you can't retire when you thought you could, or you're going to come, significant change to your life choices. I think people need to talk to people for that conversation, and I think everyone kind of connects with different kinds of people. And you can't just have one homogenized way of doing advice, one homogenized way of having conversations, and think that will serve everybody. You have to have space for idiosyncrasies and different types of people who connect with different types of clients, and kind of make space for that. But for that, you need the independent advice sector to survive.
Yeah. And from the firms you speak to and work with, do you think there's space for them to grow in that sense?
There's massively demand. There's absolutely no problem with demand for their services. And everyone we work with is, the biggest squeeze they have is getting the power planning resource to physically process cases. It's not that they can't find clients. The thing that they need help with is it's attracting talent, it's attracting the funding they need to grow, it's meeting kind of regulatory costs. And obviously our argument is, well, work with us, or work with someone who provides a centralized investment proposition, and that might help. It takes some of the cost out of your business. You can deploy that cost to the front line. Everyone will have their arguments about what will help these people, obviously, and you might say, I would say that, wouldn't I? But I do think that it will be, whether it's working with us or others, it will be collaboration and partnership that will enable these people to survive.
Yeah, that's a good point you touched on. Do you think there'll be generally more outsourcing for IFAs, not just in investment, but in power planning, in technology? Do you think they're going to start reaching out and grabbing more things in rather than running everything within their office and business?
I think definitely investment, and we see that happening all over the place. But very hard choosing an investment partner. And I always say to people, be really sure on us before you pick us, because it's quite hard getting a new centralized investment proposition in. It's even harder getting them out if it doesn't work. So be really cautious in that choice. Always talk to people who have already, if you're talking to anyone who's offering that service, find other people who have worked with them and talk to them. And do that. Don't just believe some massive due diligence document. Talk to actual people. I think in technology, absolutely outsourcing technology, getting smarter on technology. I think power planning is so hard. Of course, there are outsourced options for power planning, but everyone's got their own kind of idiosyncratic way of doing things. And I don't often hear advisors say, "Oh, I've found this power planning agency and it's working out great for me." To be honest, they generally say this is really frustrating. I need someone to work with me. So I think that one is tougher. I think they will continue to need good planning resource within their business, and the key to that is to have a business structure where the power planner themselves is commanding fees, and so you can see the value in that business, and they've been booked for their time, and they're adding value, and they've got a career path themselves.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for coming in the bubble and speaking to me,
Thank
Charlie.
you.